Hey guys, so I really hope that before you're watching this video, you've already seen my part 1, which is called Why Feminism and Social Media Ruins Modern Women. It's kind of like a part 1, and this current one is going to be part 2 to that, which is going to be Why Feminism and Corn Ruined Modern Men. So I think you need to watch that one first in order to understand what this one's going to be about, but this one's super essential as well. And my intention with this is not to sit here and shame men for watching corn or tell you all these things about, unrealistic standards. That's not really the main point here. There's way deeper conversations to be had regarding this topic, so please stay tuned to check them out. Before we get there, I'd like to ask you to support my channel by subscribing. As you can see, it's a new and growing channel, so please subscribe, please ring the notification bell so that you don't miss future videos, and give me your likes if you find value here, and also your comments to share your experiences. So I want to start with feminism, and in my previous video, I go into more depth regarding why feminism was created, why it's bad in general, why it's not really what we think it is. It's more so like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And we do know the obvious, we know the ways in which it affects women, but it also affects men, and from the beginning, in fact, because men were always cultured and to a degree as well biologically predisposed to be the protector and the provider in a relationship, in a family, in a community. And when you start having more women that now are independently from them financially speaking, of course, nobody is ever fully independent. That's such a myth. Like, we all need each other. We're all interdependent at the end of the day. But when you do have more women that do not rely so much on men for that provision, well, they definitely start to make a lot of them feel like they're not needed. Many women start making men feel like, well, we don't need you because I actually just needed you to provide. And now that I provide for myself, I don't really need you. And we start seeing a bit of a shift into relationships, focusing more so on the love and connection and companionship aspect, which was not really a thing back in the day, where it was just more like a contract, like you give me the kids and you take care of the home and I'll provide on the men's side. But we start having this sentiment, men start to feel less needed. There are also fewer jobs that now absolutely need men, fewer careers that need men. Women are taking more and more space in the workforce, in careers. They're even succeeding. We do know that nowadays women are doing statistically a lot better when it comes to graduating from college and certain jobs, graduating from high school, getting good grades, and they're even closing a bit of that wage gap. The only difference being that men do tend to choose jobs that are higher paying anyway, so I don't think that'll ever happen, but there's some sort of closure that's going on there for sure. The point is that men start to feel like they don't really have a purpose so much anymore. They don't have so much of a space. They're not the main breadwinner. They're not the main figure that protects women. And we also have now the government protecting women in different aspects. We have police forces, we have firefighters, we have general security. The world is more safe in general, especially in certain parts of it where you and I probably live. If a woman can't provide for herself, the government will give her some aid anyway. And back in the day, it used to be that if you could just provide for your family, which was a standard thing for the vast majority of men to do, well, your woman really respected you and she really appreciated you. But as times have started to change and more women have provided for themselves, it kind of takes like a bigger standard when it comes to provision for them to really look up to their men. Like I said, if you could just bring home the bread as a man back in the day, you were doing more than she was doing in that respect, because she was just taking care of the home and taking care of the kids. So of course she had that respect and admiration to you. Granted that everything else was also going well. But nowadays, it kind of takes more than that in many women's eyes. I'm not saying all of them, but in many women's eyes, it's like, well, I also make money. I also work. So what else? Like, what higher thing do you bring than that? Because women do need to have some sort of admiration for their man in order to feel love, feel respect, etc. So as time progresses, it's not only that men start feeling like they're not needed as much in society or in relationships, but also women start to make a point of telling them to their face that they're just not needed. We see it in all these interviews, which are ridiculous, men asking women in street interviews like, hey, do you need men? And they think that they don't, which is so absolutely pathetic and absurd. And many women genuinely, like, they're completely delusional, but many women genuinely believe they don't actually need men. And some of them are young and just repeating what they hear feminists say, but other ones have had really bitter relationships or have had a very hardened and masculine role in their lives, and maybe didn't have a father figure, or have had just men who have failed her, or maybe she just roughened herself up, who knows, and they do end up in that conclusion of, I actually don't need men at all. But as a whole, we start seeing this strange movement, which was originally supposed to be about equality, but now not so much. We start seeing this movement just pushing this idea up on men that they're just not needed. We don't really need them. We're better off without them. All they do is commit crime, commit rape. The one thing they were good for was provision, and now they don't even do that. And those who do, those who make, a ton of money, well, those are the ones that most women want and are sharing anyway. So it sends this collective message that's not very appreciative towards men. And of course, we all want to be appreciated. We all want to be respected. But of the two genders, men do need, under my opinion, to be more respected and to be more appreciated in a two-gender heterosexual dynamic or whatever. It sounded so woke. Than what a woman would. Okay, like of course we also want to feel valued and cherished, but it's a different kind of cherish. You know what I mean? Men really do need that appreciation and that feeling valued and that feeling respected. And when you have this collective telling them, I don't know what you're doing here because you no longer serve your purpose. Or women telling them to her face, like, I don't really need you. Or perhaps they don't even say it this way, so overtly so, but they say it covertly, they say it behind their backs, or they show it via their actions, that they don't really consider them and respect them that much. They don't take them into account when making important decisions. They don't regard them as the leader. In fact, they treat them just like another child in the home. When you add to this that because now women do not really rely on men so much financially, and they tend to admire just because of our nature, those men who are higher earners and higher status, and you add also the sexual liberation of women, you have this group of women who are just kind of going after this smaller percentage of men that they considered attractive to them. And also with the sexual liberation, many of them are promiscuous and many of them have had sexual access to them, and they equate this with having relationship access. So this in turn makes many women, and this is more so modern stuff, the other stuff has been taking into place quite a few decades, but what I'm talking about right now is very modern. We start seeing many women who believe that they're more attractive than they are, that they deserve more than they actually could get in another time, sexual market value speaking, that they're entitled to all these things. It's more than deserving, because I do think if you're a good person, ideally you would deserve a good person as well, but it's more than that. It's more like this entitlement, like maybe she had casual sex with some ultra attractive and rich guy, and now she thinks that because she got him to spend a couple nights with her, that she can also get one of these guys to be in a relationship with her. And maybe she can, but the reality is that there's not that many of these guys to go around, and most of these women are not going to end up with guys like these. And that's not even a problem. Like, so long as they can find somebody that's on the same page, that can love them and respect them, it should be good enough. Same way that most of you guys are not really expecting to end up with this gorgeous 10 out of 10 woman. You're usually more realistic. But what ends up happening is that most men end up being rejected by women, especially younger men nowadays. We have such an epidemic, as you guys probably know already, of lonely men. Huge percentage of young men nowadays are virgins, are lonely, are depressed. They don't even have friends, much less a girlfriend. Many are addicted to video games, to porn, and they don't even try with women because they're like, what's the point? And most of them are gonna reject me because I'm just average, and they don't want average. And to an extent, it was always somewhat this way. Women were always wanting the highest caliber men they could get, and oftentimes they were even sharing men if it got to that point. It hasn't been to this extreme in a long time. So what ends up happening? Many men, especially young men, but actually men from all ranges, because I saw a stat recently that was saying that most young men to older men, like literally was from like 18 to like 70s, I think like about 90% of them had reported that they had consumed corn in the past month. So a vast majority, almost all men nowadays, are consuming corn regularly. And I think we know this. And to be fair, most women are as well. The stats for the same age range was about 60% of women. And of course, I'm not saying men shouldn't watch corn and women can do whatever they want. That's really not the point of this video. But as I was saying in my previous video, I do think that social media validation tends to be a larger problem for women than consuming corn regularly. Same way that I wouldn't say that any man should just completely validate himself and his self-worth via social media, but at the same time I do think it's usually a bigger problem for most men, the dopamine hits that they get via porn and the results of that, than any sort of validation they could get from Instagram. So let's get into corn because all of the things that we were saying, men feeling like they're not needed, society pushing this idea that they're not needed, women telling them whether directly or indirectly that they in fact don't need them, women rejecting them. Of course, many men just end up like, where do I fit in? Like, where do I turn? And they end up turning to corn because corn is one thing that will never reject them. It's true. Corn will never reject men, whether it's men who are lonely, have zero access to women, or whether it's men that are perhaps in relationship, but the woman doesn't respect them, or she doesn't even want to have any sort of relationship with him, corn will always be there. And that's why it's so addictive in part because there's many things to talk about. We do know that corn generates an insane amount of dopamine when watched. It has been compared via brain scans to the actions of taking Coca-Cola through the nose, if you know what I mean. And it actually produces pretty much the same amount of dopamine, sometimes even larger amounts. It's something insane, the brains of regular corn users. And we just know it's an extremely addictive thing to begin with. It's something that when people start watching it, usually very young, and nowadays the ages are getting younger and younger, it's very difficult for them to start pleasuring themselves without the use of corn. Like, they pretty much rely on corn time after time, and sometimes it can get very problematic, other times not so much. And here's the thing, it's not that watching corn itself is problematic, it's the fact that watching corn regularly is problematic. And you might say that you are somebody who can watch corn with moderation, and surely some people do. I mean, there's all sorts of people on this earth, but it's one of those things that it's just very, very difficult to watch moderately. Most people do not do so. Same way that most people don't drink with moderation, same people that most people do not take caffeine with moderation, or processed foods and processed sugar and all sorts of like illegal substances and all sorts of addictive things. Most people do not do these things with moderation. In fact, I believe that moderation barely exists. Like, it's one of those things that if you're struggling with something to begin with, you should probably just cut it out of your life completely, because it's hardly something that you're going to be able to master unless, of course, serious effort and time has gone by. So corn is one of those things. I don't really believe that most men are watching corn. Most people, honestly, are watching corn in a moderate way. Like, most people are watching it quite regularly. They can't seem to get off without it. And sometimes that does get to the extreme that they can't even be in a relationship with their significant other, with a girl or whoever, without relying on corn first, or even thinking about the images in their head. And this is something that, you know, back in the day, people used to associate more so with older men, but it's happening every time with younger and younger guys, because we're seeing more and more young guys very addicted to corn and relying on it to the extent that they're even having easy issues at very young ages. I'm telling you, like 18, 19, 20, in their 20s, they're having easy issues, or they just cannot even come to fulfillment with the girl that they're with because they're so addicted to this material. And if you guys don't believe me, go on Reddit. Like, there are some stories, real life stories on Reddit that are incredible. You will not believe them. And the problem is not even that there's an occasional story about these things. They're very common stories about very young men, and of course older men as well, struggling with corn. And what makes corn so addictive? I mean, we know it's something that generates extreme pleasure. And talking about men, we do know that men do enjoy sexual variety. For the vast majority of them, they do enjoy this for generations to generations. It's their fantasy. And there's nothing more varied than corn. Corn has absolutely every sort of woman you could imagine out there, every hair color, eye color, every position that she could do, every body type, fake, natural, absolutely anything you could dream of, they have it there. It's to the point that not even a king back in the day that had unlimited sexual access to a variety of beautiful young women could see all the images that are in corn nowadays. Like, it's to that point. So of course it's going to become something extremely engaging, extremely addictive, extremely pleasurable to the average man. And feminists do seem to have a lot of trouble with the fact that the women in corn tend to be treated poorly. That's another topic that I'm not even going to get into. I do believe there's some of that going on, but not getting into that right now. And they also seem to have a problem with the beauty standards presented in corn. And I do think that's a problem, but I think it's more of a problem for a minority of men. I don't think that most men, even if they're watching corn regularly, so long as they have an attractive woman, and by that I mean she's not morbidly obese, they love her, or they have some sort of attraction towards her, it's not really a problem, I believe, for the most part. Of course, there are some men, and I have read some stories or met some people that their man was so extremely addicted to corn that they just could not really find himself attracted to average women. But I think that's more so rare. And to be honest, I don't even think most corn actresses are like that beyond beautiful. I think it's more so the fact that their job is to look good, and most of them are fit, and the average American woman is overweight. So, you know, it's just fit young women. I think it's more so the variety than the fact that they're extremely beautiful, because I think they're mostly just somewhat above average women. Regarding the relationship aspect and combining that with the dopamine, since most people, men and women, but especially guys, start watching corn quite early, they are pretty much accustoming themselves to these huge hits of dopamine and of variety from a very, very, very young age. I know I can't say the word variety, guys, I'm sorry. But yes, from a very young age, these young little boys, teenagers, and then young men, and then adults are completely accustoming themselves to these huge hits of varied content. And when it comes to men that maybe do want to have a long-term relationship or even marriage, I would say, I would advise them to stay away from it, because you're essentially training yourself at just being aroused at that. You know, how do you undo decades of basing your sexual pleasure exclusively on these extreme bouts of variety, to the point that, like I was saying, not even kings had this extreme access. If long-term relationships are already difficult, you know, you're with the same person the rest of your life in that context, imagine on top of that, you have the fact that you're used to all of that. And now you have to undo decades and years of all this programming. It makes it even more difficult, I would say. And honestly, same for the women, because like we were saying, women are also part of this corn situation. And another thing that's quite interesting that we could even talk about in a future video, because it's not so much the main topic here, the main point that I will get to in a second, but it's the fact that we do know that men's sex drive tends to be driven more so by novelty and variety. You know, they are more so sexually stimulated with the presence of a new partner and with varied partners. And to an extent, women too, but I would say men to a bigger extent. It has been studied after all. Women tend to need more of the fantasy, the emotional safety, and many other components. It tends to be a more complex drive. But what ends up happening is that many men who are consuming corn regularly, their drive is extremely high. You know, it's plummeted because they are basically fulfilling their drive on what drives it, if that makes any sense. You know, their drive is driven by novelty and variety. And guess what? There's nothing that presents more novelty and variety than corn itself. So they tend to think that their drive is actually higher than it is when comparison to just being in a normal, stable, more boring, probably, relationship where they don't have access to all these crazy images, or where they have decided to limit themselves. And what ends up happening is that many guys, when they do quit this addiction or this process of constantly consuming corn, their sex drive goes down because it's no longer being driven by their biological imperative in this sense. And many guys don't like this. You know, they want to feel like they have an insane drive, which is why many of them do end up going back, even if they don't realize consciously. Another very scary thing to me is the fact that we know that corn users, not all, but I think most of you guys can probably relate. Please feel free to share in the comment section. It's a safe space. But we do know that most corn users start with very vanilla standard stuff, and over time that does not really produce the same dopamine. It's not as pleasurable. It's kind of like you've been there, done that, you know, at least in your mind, and it's kind of like, next, what's next? And knowing all the variety that there's in corn sites, many newer things are coming out, many of them quite dark, and many guys and women too, of course, end up watching things that they didn't really start being aroused by, they didn't even care about at the beginning, or they didn't even know about in the beginning, and they get to a point where that's the only thing that can turn them on. And I've heard some crazy stories from people I know that they just ended up watching some pretty insane things, and that of course they felt some guilt about, but there's also many sick people who will never feel guilt and just kind of keep going in that tunnel of darker and darker things. And why is this a problem? It's a problem because, yes, what we're saying, how are you going to be stimulated by normal life if you kind of need these crazy bouts of completely crazy things? And I do think that's more so a minority. I don't think most men like need crazy things in real life, but it's still worth talking about because of what's coming. And what's coming is AI corn, and AI corn is going to absolutely ruin everybody. I think if regular corn has messed up men to the extent that it has, can we just imagine AI corn, which is going to be extremely easily designable, as in you can pretty much design whatever you want. It's going to look super real. And what bothers me the most about it is that I wonder if really sick people are going to be doing stuff regarding minors and all these things. Like, I wonder what's the control going to be regarding all that. But yeah, if you are someone that does not feel good when you watch corn, deep down, you know it's not really good for you. You know you're wasting energy that you could be using for other things. You know it's not really adding much to your life, and you know you might be even lying to yourself about it, or even you have a bigger problem with it. Perhaps, you know, you can't really be focused in your relationship because of it, or perhaps you can't get off without it in a normal context, or it's the thing that you look forward to the most, or you can't even go some time without it. Like, that's how I know most guys have a problem with it, or most women who watch it regularly as well, because you're like, oh, well, if you don't care about it, if it's such a simple thing for you, why don't you just take, I don't know, a few weeks off without it and see what happens? And most absolutely cannot. They end up going back, and that's how you know that there is some sort of component, some sort of addictive component there, because otherwise it's like if you tell me now, I don't know, stop drinking from this black water bottle. Can you do that? Can you stop drinking from this black water bottle 3 weeks? I'll be like, absolutely. And I probably won't even drink from it again. Why? Because I'm not really gaining much from this water bottle. There's no addictive component there. There's not much that it's given to me. I just kind of use it because it's there, but it's not something I'm depending on to get to any point. Not the same for people who say, yeah, I can absolutely do that. And a few days after stopping it, they're right back on it. So guys, if you are at that point where you're really struggling with corn, or where it's something that you might be struggling with, I do recommend that you take some time from it to see if you can actually live like your own sexuality with yourself, or if you're with someone, that as well, without relying on corn. And especially taking into account that AI corn is going to be ridiculously addictive and ridiculously problematic. And if you can't manage your corn use now, you will not be able to manage your AI corn use, nor will you be able to use that energy into bigger, more important projects than giving it to random women online, who, by the way, you're also validating, because that's another point. Men seem to really have a problem nowadays, understandably so, with women who live of their sexuality, who sexualize themselves, corn stars, OF girls, IG models, whatever it is. But yet you're validating these women, you're basically making them rich and famous, or you're giving them a living. Some of them are not rich, but they're living off from you. So you can't really be the problem and the solution at the same time. You can't be out here like, oh, women like these, this and that, they're the problem there. And then you're actually validating them, whether you think so or not. And yes, by watching corn, even if you don't follow any of these women in real life, by watching corn, you're also validating them, because they do live of the views that you give them. Said all that, I do want to talk about what to me is actually the main problem regarding corn usage for men, especially young men, but men in general. And here's the thing. I do believe that men's sexual drive, to an extent, is something that has always driven them, has always pushed them to achieve certain things in life. Whether that was providing for their family, protecting their family, developing a career, protecting their community, fighting. And throughout history, we've seen that unless a man was to that point that he could actually provide and protect for his family, that he was successful within himself, that he could make something from himself, he was not even allowed to have a wife. In some parts of the world, we see that still. In very, very simplistic terms, throughout history, we have seen that if women were to turn their sexuality around to men, they were instead granted provision, protection, safety, all these things. And with men, it would be the other way around. If they granted, provision, resources, protection, all these things, then the women would give them their sexual drive, or their sexuality in this case. But when you have a world where most men are watching porn regularly, even in real life, they have zero sexual access, whether that's fair or not, whether there's somebody who is just not attractive and who has not done anything to change that around, or whether it's quite unfair and he probably should be with somebody if those women around him valued him more. When you have a society built on that, you have many men who just have zero motivation. Why would they be motivated? If, of course, we have, the women in real life who are rejecting them, or who have crazy standards, who maybe they're not even rejecting him, but he's the one that's like, I don't really want a relationship with them. Refer back to my other video if you want to know why. And then on top of that, you have him have all of this access to a king's level harem, basically, or even more so, let's be real. You basically completely eliminate any sort of drive or desire that he could have to conquer the world in his own way, or to find and live his purpose. If he already has access to all these gorgeous, young, different women, at least via his screen, it's not the same, but your lizard brain doesn't really know that. And those in real life don't care and just are ignoring him, or he doesn't even care about them either. Why is he going to try to become a better man and to provide and protect and to take care of his community and just to improve the world at a point in time when we needed lots of strong men who are going to leave their energy from corn, take it away, and actually put it into much higher purposes? And this is why, to me, there's something a lot darker and deeper going on. I don't think any of this is an accident. I think it's all too convenient to be a coincidence. It makes way too much sense that all of a sudden we have the population, the part of the population that can fight, that can protect, that can conquer, that is stronger physically. It makes so much sense from a very sinister point of view that all of them are just completely devoid of purpose and just at home watching porn, playing video games, eating McDonald's, with zero drive, with zero motivation, with zero desire to make the world a better place or to stand up against injustices and just take anything and everything that comes to them. Our Machiavellic enough, if our sinister enough to want to design a world of slaves, basically, of people who had absolutely no thinking for themselves, no drive to better things, no drive to combat injustices, I would make sure to take that group of people that's more likely to combat injustices because they're physically stronger and because they have that drive to begin with to protect and conquer. Women tend to stay home and tend to be the ones that are protected. If I wanted to do that, I would make sure that that group of men that could actually fight against me would be as dormant as possible. And how can you make men as dormant as possible? By giving them this crazy, like I was saying, king levels harem. Because now they're comfortable, Deep down, they know they could be doing better. Deep down, they know they're worth more than that, and they have a life purpose worth fulfilling. But they're in such a comfortable state with their junk food and their comfortable job and their video games and just staying home in their warm blankets, watching porn all day, that they will probably not really stand up against anything that they don't really like, so long as it's nothing crazy. And that's why I think that social media is an instrument that's pretty much being used to maintain women as dormant as possible, and porn is just being used as well to maintain men as dormant as possible, and social media as well, because social media nowadays is pretty much porn. Let's be real. You just have to go on TikTok or Instagram or even X, and you see all sorts of things. And finally, I want to say that if you disagree with the things that I'm saying, of course it's your right, but I do want to ask you to just take some time out from it, because I have met and I have talked to various men who used to watch porn regularly, and they, maybe like you, thought that it wasn't really affecting them not much, that they didn't have an addiction problem, that, you know, it was just moderate use, no problem at all. And then they did, as a challenge, stop using it for a while, and their life actually did change. And in many respects, for one, they stopped sexualizing all women that were in, you know, of course they're still attracted, or blood and matter, whatever, they're still attracted to women, but not to the extent that every woman would be like a corn scene inside their mind, something that had become so normalized in their head, but that's actually not normal. They stopped being completely driven by women, you know, just thinking women this, women that, instead of focusing on their own projects, on their own missions. Of course, their own interpersonal relationships often improved as well. And more than anything, they became disgusted by it, and they're like, why am I giving this my energy and sometimes even my money, in the case of OFP and Sims, when I could be using that to better myself and to better my actual relationships, and in the case that I don't have any, well, to find out why I don't and actually get one, or many, if that's what you're into. Yeah, I just want to ask you to try it out. Same way that if you're a woman who is really struggling with that social media validation, I would ask you to try out not being in it for a while and seeing if you can reset from it, and if you can find some sort of self-worth away from the likes and comments that Sims are giving you. Same with men. Just try a few weeks, couple weeks, ideally couple months without corn, and then come back to this video and share with us how it was. Or if you've had similar experiences, whether you've been on it and been off it, also share with us how it's been. Hope you like this. Hope you find this valuable. Please let me know in the comment section. Please give me your likes. Please subscribe. Thank you so much, and I will see you very soon.